Hello everyone and welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass series. My name is Olga and today we'll be talking about how to use your coursebook materials effectively. And to start with, I want to clarify what I mean by coursebook materials. It's not only the course books that you use, but it's also the teacher's book and usually workbook and some recordings or CDs that go together with these coursebook materials. All together, the whole package is coursebook materials. And to start with, I'd like you to think of teaching a certain class of students, so the class that you're teaching at the moment, and think of the coursebook that you're using. So what's your attitude to this coursebook? And what are advantages and disadvantages of using this particular coursebook with your learners? Whenever I ask these questions, so the answers are quite different. Some teachers say that I never use coursebooks, I never use them, I hate them. Some teachers are the opposite. They say, I love using coursebooks, they're my favorite. Some teachers say, I use only some materials from the coursebook, and some of them prefer to use supplement materials to come together with their coursebook. Right, and that all depends on you. It depends on your experience. It depends on your habits. It depends on your personality. But I think it's really, really important for any teacher to identify the advantages and disadvantages of using the coursebook, because it's our task as a teacher to assess the materials and to think how to make them more useful for your particular group of learners. So I think it's our task as teachers to understand the advantages and disadvantages of using coursebooks in class, and to assess the materials and think how to make them more effective. A lot of teachers mention the following things as advantages of using coursebooks. Definitely, they give you a clear framework. There are a lot of pictures and they're appealing to visual learners. For students, they do provide a sense of security, because when they forget a grammar rule, they forget some vocabulary, they know where to look it up. So they go back to their course books. They always are accompanied by teacher's book, and they provide support for teachers, and thus they reduce your preparation time. And not to mention that they actually are written by very smart people who have already tested them several times, before they put them into production and before we can use them. Although a lot of people also notice some disadvantages of using course books. So first of all, they can be quite predictable, and that's how the students can lose their motivation, so they can be bored, right? Sometimes they're not relevant to the group of learners you're teaching, because they're written by people for example, from Europe, but they're not necessarily relevant to students in Asia or to students in Middle East or other countries. Some teachers say that they don't like using course books because they take away the initiative. And of course, the teachers are becoming more and more reliant on course books, and that affects their creativity. So this is some of the understanding of it. And very often course books do not cater to different levels and abilities, and very often you have multi-level groups that you're working with, right? And but you have to teach them the same material. So again, it's up to us, up to teachers, to decide which materials to choose. But I think if we know the advantages of using course books, we can build on them. And if we're aware of disadvantages, we can plan our lessons so that we can eliminate these disadvantages and make the coursebook materials more effective. Okay, now let's have a look at some ways of adapting coursebook materials. So there are several simple steps that you can take to make them more interesting for your learners. First of all, you can change a lot of things in the activities and the materials. First of all, you can change the focus of the activity. For example, if this is writing, you can make it speaking. If this is reading, you can make it listening and stuff like that. You can change the type of the activity. And for example, if this is a gap fill exercise, you can turn it into a open the brackets, or you can turn it into a role play or multiple choice. You can change your direction patterns, and whenever you see, okay, so this activity is used like at this particular stage, the students are working by themselves. So maybe they would benefit from working in pairs. Maybe they would benefit from working in a group or in a small group or as a whole class. So this is the thing that you can change and you can vary. You can also change the length of the activity. You can make it longer or shorter depending on your students, right? So you can extend the activity, and that's what we talked about in the very beginning. So you can add different sentences. So if you have 5 sentences, add 2 more, make them 7 so that the students can cope with it. You can add some questions. If there are like discussion questions and you know that the students are strong enough to deal with them, so add more questions. Introduce personalized type of questions. Ask the students about their opinion, about their experience. They do love it, and you will notice how drastically the situation will change in the lesson. You can actually do a project at the end of the lesson, for example. Like if I ask you to write advantages and disadvantages of using Coursebooks, so if I ask you to do a project, I would ask, okay, so guys, you work in groups, you work in pairs, and write down, make a poster about advantages and disadvantages of using these materials, and then present this poster to your group. You also can exploit the materials even more and to see what you can use from it. Is there any useful language that you would like to introduce? Is there any grammar that you think the students would benefit from? Any vocabulary that they need to know? Or maybe there are some cultural issues that you would like to discuss and might be interesting for the students to learn. So as you can see, there are 3 simple steps. So change, extend, and exploit all the materials. And by using them, you can use all 3 of them, or you can use 1 or 2. It's up to you guys. So you decide, you make a decision. But it can bring some variety into your lessons, and actually always remember that you don't teach the activity, you don't teach the lesson, you teach the students. So these activities need to be relevant to your students and their needs. Okay, let's have a look. Let's have a look at what we can do with some of the activities and how we can change them. For this particular task, I take New English File Upper Intermediate Workbook. Probably you're familiar with it. And in all the series, there is a section which is called "What Do You Remember?" or revision. So let's have a look at this particular part, at grammar part. Usually it's grammar, vocabulary, practical language, reading and listening, but we'll take only grammar part, because usually what happens, you have this exercise, fill in the gaps, off you go, that's all. End of story. Let's have a look at how we can work with it a bit more and make it more interesting for the students. So as you could see, so these grammar exercises, there are 2 parts. Each part has 5 sentences. First part has 5 gap fill exercises, gap fill sentences, and the second part, multiple choice. So if I think of my students, for example, upper intermediate group, they are actually, they're very fast learners, and for them multiple choice will be not challenging enough. So I decided, okay, so I need to put them together and make it as a gap fill. It will be, although the context in the second part is not always very clear, because it can be different. So, but it can just trigger some conversation. And at the end, I have 8 sentences, 8 gap fill sentences. If you look at it, it's quite boring, right, to do. So fill in the blanks, and that's it. So what I decided to do, I decided to cut them into separate pieces of paper. So we have 8 sentences, 8 slips of paper. What I did after that, I put these slips of paper around the classroom. Okay, so the next step. And I put the students into pairs, so they work together so they can help each other. And each pair should have a notepad and a pen. On the notepad, they write down the numbers from 1 to 8. And then the task is for these pairs to walk around the classroom and read the tasks, read the sentences on the slips, and write down the answer on their piece of paper. But they don't have to write the whole sentence. They only need to write one word that goes into the gap. So at the end, they have something like that, right? The brilliancy of it is that they can start at any number. So you have 8 sentences, they can work at the same time, and it saves a lot of time during the lesson. After that, I asked them to put the same things on the board, and this is what we have. And then you can play a mean teacher. You can say, okay, guys, do you remember what was the sentence number 1? And what was sentence number 4? Right, you'll be surprised, but whenever your students do like gap fill exercise, they don't notice the context. They don't look at what's going, like what's happening around it. And that's actually a very good exercise because it will help them to reconstruct the sentences, to work together. And you can be a nice teacher at this point. You may say, okay, so remember, okay, write only the sentences that you're 100% sure. They can talk together, they can talk in pairs, and write the sentences that they're sure of. Sometimes, or you may say, okay, you can give them some hints, or the last thing, the last resort will be all these slips of paper. They're still around the room, and they can just refer to them and write down the answers. So that's what you have at the end. 8 beautifully written sentences all on the board. So when I was getting ready for the lesson, I was thinking, so they have nice sentences. What can I work with? I can probably work a little bit more with number 2 because it is a very good conversation, right? And students normally have problems with present perfect and with have, and usually they say, I've been to India twice. Really? Which is absolutely fine. But they never say, have you? So they probably have, did you? Or something like that. So this will require a bit more work. Then I was thinking about number 6, because it's a very nice grammar structure and will be useful for students to work with it and understand how to use it. And tech questions. They always have problems with tech questions. All right. And let's have a look at what we can do here. So number 2, I've been to India twice. Have you? I'd love to go. Right. So the first task is make 3 similar sentences about the places you visited, films you've seen, things you've done. So the students work individually. They write 3 things, 1, 2, 3 on a piece of paper. After them, okay, guys, so now you can mingle. So stand up, walk around, talk to each other, and tell each other about 3 things. And then your partner needs to react and add more information. So it will be number B part, right? So have you? I'd love to go, or I've never been to. So in this case, we have, instead of a gap fill exercise, we have actually a communicative one, because they have the reason to speak, to share their experience, and the reason to listen to each other, because they need to remember the partner's experiences. Because at the feedback stage later on, I would ask, okay, do you have some same experience, a different experience? What do you remember about Jane or Natalie, for example? Stuff like that. Okay, so the second part is like, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll finish this part. So what can we do with it? So the main problem with this is that the students usually don't understand when we use it. So they don't understand the context. So we can work here a little bit. So by asking, when do we say this phrase? What is the situation? And ask the students to think of at least two examples of the situation. For example, I don't like to do my homework. Oh, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll finish. Or I don't want to eat this soup, Mom. Or the sooner you'll start, the sooner you'll finish. They can be fun examples. Some of them can be appropriate, some of them not very appropriate, but it can give some food for thought for the students. Right. After that, they probably need a bit more time with practicing. So you scaffold this part and give them some examples. So practice good. So make statements, similar statements. So the more you practice, the better you become. Yeah. Or the more you exercise, the fitter you become, something like that. And after they've practiced it in their small groups or in pairs or as a whole class, you can ask them to write 3 statements or several statements that they believe in. And after that, they can work in smaller groups, like 3 or 4 people, and they can say statements to each other. And then the rest of the group need to listen and say, do you agree or disagree? You can extend it a bit more and say why you agree or why you disagree, right? So providing your examples. But this will be a very good practice for them with focus on this particular structure. And the last thing is, you didn't like the film, did you? Right? In the last activity, you can put them together in pairs. For example, they work in pairs and write 5 statements about your partner using this model. In this particular activity, they are making predictions, so they're not quite sure. The next step that I wanted to do here is work in pairs, say your statement to each other, and tell your partner what you think about, listen to what your partner thinks about you and add more information, right? The problem here is that you need to react to this, right? And in order to react, we have here, you didn't like the film, did you? We have here only the first part of the conversation, so we don't have the second part of the conversation. So they need to know how to agree and disagree. And that will be, but I did, which will be disagreement. And no, I didn't, which will be agreement with the first part. So you need to clarify these bits a bit. And another thing is that intonation with tag questions. So when you're quite sure about what's going on, intonation goes down. So you say, you didn't like the film, did you? So you're not asking actually, so this is a statement. But if you're not quite sure, intonation of the tag question goes up and then say, you didn't like the film, did you? Yeah, and the students need to know that. And you can have a lot of fun practicing it first. And after that, they can work in pairs and agree or disagree and share their experiences. And then the last bit is, how many statements did you guess right? So this will add some communicative focus for this particular activity and will help students to to continue conversation. Right, as you could see, so we had at the very beginning of the practice part, we had only 8 gap fill sentences. And by using these 3 types of activities, plus the gallery walk at the very beginning, it can last for the whole lesson. And the student will have a better understanding of different structures. They have a better, they have more chances to speak and more practice of the target language or of the language, right? So later today, we'll have a bit more practice with adapting coursebook materials. We'll definitely look at some online tools to supplement your lessons. And I very much hope that you'll share your experiences and ideas about how to use coursebook materials. I think the most important thing is that for the coursebook to be relevant to the context in which you're teaching and to your learners. And this is what you need to look at when assessing and choosing coursebook. You don't have to. You can supplement it if you want, but you also can exploit it, exploit the materials that you have in the course book to the full. Lack of organization, outdated material, and for me, as I'm a visual learner, so no pictures, bad course book. There is no right answer. So it's up to you guys. It's up to the teachers to decide. But remember, you teach the learners, you don't teach the course book.